For people who have no idea what the censorship industrial complex is, how would you describe it?
Well, to answer that question, you really have to go back to the beginning of the Twitter files. So we were invited in. I mean, really, it was, as you mentioned, Matt Taibbi, Barry Weiss were invited by Elon Musk and his associates into Twitter to figure out what was going on, because we knew that there was pretty significant censorship of disfavored voices, mostly conservative voices, but other voices too, for several years. And Elon was committed to some transparency as to what was happening. So we were given a pretty broad access to emails and internal messages through Slack. And at first it was sort of a picture, and we published a series of things about there was just a lot of what you would call woke culture. 99% of political donations from Twitter executives had gone to Democrats. And so they were censoring things like, you know, one user, Megan Murphy, wrote in response to a trans debate, she wrote, you know, but men aren't women though. And she was deplatformed for tweeting that.
Graham Linehan, the British comedian who I've also had on the show, had exactly the same tweet, men aren't women though, and was suspended from Twitter.
Yeah, so that was clearly a strong cultural and political bias. But then we started seeing something else that was very strange, which was requests from the FBI to deplatform people, and people from the Department of Homeland Security, the DHS, which was the coordinating body created after 9/11 in the United States. And that was very chilling to start to see basically law enforcement and intelligence agencies demand that people be censored effectively by Twitter executives.
How is that working? Like, they were sending emails to those at Twitter demanding specifically things take down, and there was payment, there was money involved, right?
Well, right. I mean, all of this is, of course, hugely contentious. And in fact, your conversation with the Telegraph reporter, because what was happening here in Britain was very similar. I mean, we were reading these stories that were coming out of the Telegraph, that have been coming out of the Telegraph for the last several weeks. So the defenders of this practice say, look, this is just, you know, government officials flagging violations of Twitter's terms of service. What could possibly be wrong with that? Well, it turns out there's a lot wrong with it. There was, basically the government officials, both in the UK and in the United States, who were requesting censorship of users, were getting priority access. So it wasn't sort of an equal opportunity thing. They were right there. So you see the Twitter is creating a bias towards government demands for censorship. The United States, we have even stricter protections of speech than you do in Britain, though they're very strong here too. But for the United States, the government cannot interfere in the rights of people to express themselves, except for in a very limited number of cases, basically around incitement to violence and fraud. And so even having the government requesting censorship by Twitter executives is, in my view, and the view of many legal scholars, a violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution. So then the money, I was the first to report on this, is that we then started to see in 2020, Twitter started to accept payment from the federal government for its efforts. This was legally justified as the expense of Twitter executives having to engage in these activities, and there's a law that allows for compensation. If you're helping on a federal investigation or a law enforcement investigation, the social media executives can be compensated for it, but it's a clear conflict of interest. You're paying people to engage in censorship. And so there was a lot of debate about that and whether it was justified. But to make a long story short, it was widespread. It was a very intensive and coordinated activity by multiple government agencies in the United States, in the UK, requesting censorship on myriad issues.